Welcome to Access Ideas, where we share insights and perspectives that spark curiosity, conversation, and inspiration. I'm Yana, and joining us today is Fiona Pasentino. Fiona is making international waves as a speaker, blogger, podcaster, and the award-winning author of the Comic Books for Executives series. Based in the Netherlands, she excels in making AI understandable for non-technical audiences by focusing on the essential human aspects of communication and organizational culture. Today, we'll see how Fiona's creative use of game-like elements, also called gamification, helps change the way companies work, what it really means to be part of a team, and how humor helps us learn better and enjoy our work more. We'll also explore specific tools you can use at work or for creative projects, highlighting benefits and how to decide which tool is best for different challenges. Fiona will also highlight upcoming trends in quantum computing and robotics, offering a preview of the next big shifts in technology that could revolutionize our approach to work and innovation. Last but not least, be sure to check our episode show notes for links to Fiona's website and her podcast, Working Humans. And with that, I bring you Fiona Pasentino. Welcome to Access Ideas, Fiona. It's great to have you here.
Thanks so much, Jenna. I love being here.
I'd love you to introduce yourself and share a little bit of your story. You have a really interesting background in corporate communications, but now you're building a reputation as an AI integration specialist. You've got a lot of insights. You have a podcast. You've produced comic books. Maybe take a few moments to tell the story of your career in terms of where it led you and why you're here today.
Yeah, thanks, Jenna. Well, I definitely had a wandering road getting here. I started out as a visual designer and an artist, and that was many, many years ago. I found my way, my very first job was in the gaming industry. So I, do these little characters and these backgrounds and so on. So I learned a lot about engagement. We'd use these games to create workplace games, engagement drivers and so on. This was many, many years ago when they were back on floppy disks. And then got into e-learning and from there, corporate communications. And I spent about 12 years in corporate comms, and that bled into employee engagement and culture. Wound up running small teams that were focused on people's happiness and inspiration at work. And that was also during COVID too. So I got a little bit of taste of what that meant to our working ways and the kind of permanent changes that are happening. So I started writing and creating these comic books because I do think that comics are a fantastic way of talking about sometimes dry or difficult subjects. It puts everybody at ease. We can deal with it with our very short attention spans. They make us laugh. They're just great in every way. So I started writing about what COVID meant to our work life and our leadership and how we feel and how we bring ourselves to the job. Because I saw a lot of things going down, bad and good, during COVID. And then I started ranking another one. and then finally I went off on my own. When AI kind of hit, I had already had a master's. I got an MBA in 2019 in Amsterdam. And one of the special concentrations was AI. And I was just hooked from the very first class and wound up kind of doubling down on that special focus and just started learning everything I could about it. And then when it hit for real in October 2023 is when it really sort of burst out onto the scene in a big way. Then I understood what it was and what it could do. And it was quite easy to jump out and sort of help.
You're referring to the launch of ChatGPT
2022, that's right,
being more accessible to everyone, and then everyone started to experiment and take that tool and apply it to their work.
That's right. Yeah. So it's only really a year and a half old, this whole thing.
Exactly. But I'm really interested in your background in game design and comic book design here, because I think it ties in uniquely with your understanding, or at least your willingness to experiment with AI tools. Can you talk a little bit about that in terms of understanding what it means for an audience to engage, and then maybe how you've taken your knowledge of game design and comic book design and tied that into your knowledge and your teaching of AI tools.
Yeah, sure. I think gaming is a really critical platform. We don't quite understand how many people are gaming at any one time. I mean, especially as you scale younger down the chain, the amount of hours that we spend in a gaming environment, whether digital or not, is enormous. And because of this, we are training ourselves, and we're training to be in this kind of competitive, semi-competitive, low-bar competition environment. And we love it. It's fun for us. We do our best when we have a light level of competition. We tend to lose ourselves in this gaming world and take risks that we wouldn't take in the real world because it's this kind of safe space. And we are as emotionally involved with a game as we would be in our real life. It's brain studies show that certain centers light up in the same way that they do if you're actually having a real experience. So these studies have been trickling out for the last 20 years. I mean, it's not a new phenomenon, but I think what's new now is the accessibility of gaming. And then we're sort of dipping in and out of gaming throughout our day, even if it's the 2-minute check-in to your Sudoku board or whatever it is you're doing, just as you're waiting for the bus or as you're waiting for somebody to call or something, that we're always kind of dipping into these little environments. And then we see gaming entering into other parts of our societal interactions, like Tinder is a perfect example. It's a gamified approach to dating. Or there are so many applications of this that we're seeing now that's partly why they're so popular.
It's almost as though gamification is a core ingredient to engagement now. If employees or teams don't have an element of fun or a hook that feels a bit like a game or something that makes them want to come back and do that, it's less likely to reel them in for the long term. And so you've been seeing this for a long time. You understand the appeal of games, why people go back to them. Like you mentioned, there's no difference between our engagement emotionally with a game versus what we might do IRL in real life, as they say. But you also address something that is fundamental to most people's experience of work life today, which is overstress, burnout. You have an episode actually that I highly recommend to our listeners about the false sense of urgency, or maybe the escalation of what we call urgency.
Yeah.
And so in this way, maybe this is the dark side of gamification. We've almost gamified ourselves into work where we color code everything as red, urgent. It all needs to be done. And sometimes we forget that not everything is urgent, or we tend to be hesitant maybe to deprioritize because we feel like our importance, our purpose, our impact in the workforce is related to that. Do we do important work? Do we make an impact? So maybe you can talk for a moment a little bit about how do we help teams connect and engage while also maybe reducing that overload and that over sense of urgency.
Yeah, I actually don't think that urgency management is directly related to gamification. I think these are two different swimming lanes. I have noticed that urgency is becoming, woven into our language more and more. And it's an addiction, and it's a lie that you're that important. I mean, we almost kind of use it as a competition among ourselves socially, like, I'm so busy. What about, I'm busier than you kind of thing. Like, who's so busy you're working 110-hour weeks? And it's this kind of macho thing that I don't quite understand. Like, if you have a life outside of your work and let's say you have children, every hour that you work is an hour that's taken away from your kids. Or if you have a hobby, every hour that you work is taken away from that hobby, or from your friends, or from your partner, or from the volunteer work that you can do, or the travel that you do, or the writing that you do. It's not like the sheer number of hours that you work makes you a more important person. It just means you're a less competent person in those other areas. And it does something to us if we work over a certain number of hours. We can only really put in 6 hours of good brain work per day. That's just the limit of our human abilities. And we tend to try to go superhuman. And women and men have this problem. And we tend to do it. The women may find themselves being like the workhorse supermom, and the guys tend to, shut out a lot of things in the rest of their life and become, work only. And so it's all genders, it's all ages. We see people, for all cultures doing this. It's really an epidemic that is, part of it also has to do with the number of channels that are hitting us. If you looked at our working environment about 10 years ago even, you'd have email and you'd have your phone. And that was pretty much it. Yeah. Now you have WhatsApp and you have Twitter and you have Slack channels and you have email and then you have, all your social channels, your Instagram, your LinkedIn, they're all binging at you all the time. And this sort of splinters our attention even more. And every time we go from one activity to the next and we're switching a task, let's say you're writing some piece of text like an article, and then every time that you switch to check your email or switch to get a Bing notification on your Slack channel, somebody's trying to reach you, the switching, your brain can do it fairly quickly, but you still lose about up to 2 or 3 minutes of cognitive ability as your brain is making that switch. It's not that easy as we think. Just because your eyeballs go from your screen on the article that you're working on to the other thing that you're doing, it doesn't mean that your brain is caught up yet with that attention, right? So we kid ourselves that we can, I'm just going to check this email real quick and then jump back into my article and, I got a bing from my boss and I got to respond to that. That, if you marry that situation with the expectation of constant availability and that you're always able to be reached at all times, then there's a reason why you're not responding. So if you get a bing from your boss, the fact that he knows or she can pretty much be confident that you received that message, and no matter what you're doing, even if you're going grocery shopping, if you're going out for a run, and so you're choosing not to answer it in that moment. And that's kind of a political choice, not just a logistical choice. You can't answer right now because you're driving or whatever. But
can we pause there for a second? Because I think you have an interesting or somewhat unique perspective on this culturally too, because originally you're from the United States, but you live and work in the Netherlands in Europe. Can you talk for a moment maybe about those cultural differences even between those two regions and how you noticed things have changed maybe even in the Netherlands to be more urgency focused or rushed?
Yeah, I do think there's a big difference between life in Europe and life, working life in Europe and working life in the United States. Mm-hmm. We have vacations and we have fought. We workers have fought for a work-life balance. American workers have not succeeded in fighting for this work-life balance. I think there's just too much insecurity in the working world in America. Mm-hmm. You're too replaceable. The pace is too fast, and people are basically putting up with it. And just the entire environment lands on the side of the employer rather than the employee. And in Europe, it's pretty much the opposite. And it's just a basic value and principle that, you're going to have your month of vacation. And efficiency and productivity studies do show that Northern European countries far outperform hour by hour the American worker just because you need to retract and contract in order to do more and do more in a focused way. Americans tend to put in many, many more working hours, but actually get less done. Just like when you're an archer and you're drawing your bow and you have to pull back in order to let fly. If you're always, you can't always just be going forward. There are times when you have to pull back, recharge, and then release, and you end up going further. And this is something that the American culture tends to focus on. More is better. More is always better. Whereas the European mindset is more towards quality and balance for a full life package to achieve, actually, in many cases, better results. We don't have the same GDP, but it doesn't matter. I mean, because who cares, right? It's about your full picture. Who cares if you make, $500,000 a year if you have no time to spend it? It's a full picture.
Well, and the health costs too. I mean, I think that's
100%.
one of the most tragic elements where people are literally working themselves to death, and
100%.
Then, they end up with chronic issues. So definitely always like to bring that up because it's something that's really personally important to me. But you just mentioned the word that in American culture, it's more predisposed to fear, or let me rephrase that. Employees in American workplaces are sometimes more susceptible to feeling replaceable and feeling like I can't back down or take a long vacation because my employer might see that I'm not absolutely essential and they might find someone else to do my work. But now, Fiona, on top of this, we have these AI tools and we have these AI solutions that a lot of people perceive as threatening. So they can see, oh, this is now going to replace my job. They might be afraid of that, especially if they haven't used these tools or they haven't experimented. They might feel that now they're even more at risk. And I think one of the best messages that you have in your work is reminding people of how they are actually uniquely human and that they're bringing unique value into the workplace. But companies aren't so great at doing that sometimes. They just think, everyone onward and upward, just keep innovating and moving forward, and they don't always address this fear. So maybe we can talk a moment about how to cultivate environments where employees feel essential and valued, and they're not as subject to that sense of being replaced at any moment.
Yeah, actually, there are a lot of questions in there, and I'm going to try to get to all good. That's great. My big purpose is to try to focus on the non-technical professional and empower them to take these changes and this technology by the horns and really make it their own. A lot of this is being driven by the technical community, and there seems to be no slowing down, no stopping. This is charging ahead. We're going towards AGI, artificial general intelligence. That's this kind of magical moment when the AI is smarter than even, than we are in all our forms of intelligence.
Is that what we used to call the singularity? I think that was the term that was thrown around. Yeah.
Yeah, I like that term because it's like a black hole. You can see to a certain point and then you can't see after that singularity. Same thing with the AI. We're building this thing and we can see up to a certain point. And after that, it's like this giant experiment. It's this uncontrolled experiment that we're performing on ourselves that we have no idea about. And there's no way back. So, of course, we're scared. Of course, that's like a recipe for anxiety right there. We're barreling towards this kind of cliff. It could be great. There could be clouds and bunny rabbits at the other side or not. We don't know. But we're going there. And we're going there together. And we're all going to jump together. And there may be a soft landing. There may not be. We don't know. But we're doing it. And I think it's an incredibly exciting time to be alive. But I think it's also an incredibly terrifying one if you're a non-technical especially, because you don't really understand these things. So when I go into companies, I do AI integration and awareness, and I focus on understanding how this thing works, how the brain works, the relationship between data and these systems, because it's a system. It's built on, with different components. And then what are you as the human? What is your role now? And I don't believe that if you have a job that you're going to be replaced by an AI. I just think that's just something that we toss around. I think that you are in danger of being replaced by another human who understands AI tools better than you. That I think is a real thing. And especially as you get older, it's harder and harder to, learn new tricks, let's say. And this is a very big new trick. And so when I'm working with people, I really focus on the non-technicals and the leadership, top-level leadership, to understand what it is so that you can keep your people safe and get some governance in. Governance is very, very important. You need to know what tools you are using, what tools you're not using, and why. And what I do worry about are the freelancers out there. I think they are in danger. If you are a copywriter, if you are a boom operator for a traditional movie set, if you are a renderer for an architect, if you deliver a third-party service to a company, let's say, that can be replaced by AI. I think there's danger there. I think if you're at the very, very top of your game, if you're a photographer for Gucci or Prada, you will probably continue using humans because there's something very qualitatively different about the human output
perspective. Yeah.
Sure. Well, I mean, just what the human is able to do. It's an art form at that level, right? But that's a very small level. That's the top 1%, let's say, of businesses are going to be sticking with something that is inefficient, vastly more expensive. You have to also negotiate with a human as to especially with with somebody who has an artistic slant. It doesn't always come out the way you want because you're dealing with a creative artistic person and they have a vision too. And AI, you don't have to worry about that. So where I say people are in danger is when good enough is good enough. If you're creating a company newsletter once a month and it goes out to 1,000 people, it's not a deal breaker. You can easily have that done by AI. So when normally you would hire some external company to create that for you, then you might just not do that. You might just create it in-house and generate your images. You also don't need to ask people for permission to use their likeness on posts because there are no humans there on these images, or a company video or something like this. You can produce it in about 2 hours. It's not perfect, but it's good enough to promote the Taco Tuesday at the office. That's. It's just gonna be harder and harder as these tools get better to compete. So my advice to the freelancers out there is to retract and think deeply about what you want to do and what your human value is that is not replaceable by an AI. What is not replaceable by an AI? Number one, our human ability to communicate, to engage, to connect, and to inspire. Nobody is going to be inspired to follow an AI, into business. Like it's a tool that will do stuff for us. But how to be an inspirational leader, that is very much a human field. How do you create a sense of engagement, a sense of connection, being seen, being heard, being part of a team? This is a human activity, and only a human can do this well. What about if you're a freelancer and you're a copywriter? What about cultivating a very surprising, deeply human turn of phrase that you would not find in an AI? And AIs do all sound alike. They write a certain way, they sound a certain way, the visuals are a certain way. But if you can have a uniquely human spin on what you do, then you can have a better shot at keeping going what you do. For artists out there, I can recommend going back to the physical experience and the physical product. For communicators out there, focus on the physical gathering, the physical training, the presentation, because that also can't be replaced. It's a physical gathering, and people need this. And I would even suspect we need it more now than ever.
Oh, absolutely. It's interesting. You made me think when you mentioned temperament and creative people perhaps being known for being slightly more challenging sometimes to manage. Although I would say highly technical people can also be challenging in their own special way.
Anyone who's good at what they do.
Who's good.
Anyone who's really good at what they do.
Yeah.
They're going to have an opinion, and they're going to have expertise that you don't have. And you're going to be asking them to do something in their expertise, and you don't have it. And they're going to have an opinion, and we don't like to hear that always.
Absolutely. It's really interesting, though, to think of how so many people are now turning to AI tools to generate a newsletter. But if their expertise isn't communication or graphic design or photography, what looks good enough to them might fall a little flat with the employee audience. Maybe not. Like you said, it's good enough for Taco Tuesdays. But I guess my fear is when we assess something produced by AI as good enough, are we essentially training those AI tools to become lazy and produce less quality work or less? You mentioned how so much content produced by AI sounds similar. is that going to become even more so over time because people get used to that and they say, well, that's good enough. It's grammatically correct and it says what I need to say. Certainly for me, I found that it's too wordy. It doesn't use active voice often enough. It meanders on and on. I think one of my most common prompts after initially asking ChatGPT to produce something is, okay, now I want you to word this in a more conversational and relatable way and use fewer words. It's like cut it by 30% at least. Mm-hmm. So what's your philosophy there? I realize we're speculating a little bit because this is essentially developing in real time. We're seeing this happen. Are you already seeing examples of your use of AI or people that you work with using AI where they're settling for less essentially? They're finding the results are just good enough and they're not getting the quality output that they might be?
Okay, there's a lot in there. I think if I can take it back to what you asked about, where is it going? Is it going to get worse? I think there are two ways that this is going to go, and it could be that these two paths don't mutually exclude, so that we're going in both directions at the same time. The first of all, the quality of our data is decreasing because there's more and more AI-generated content out there to be part of the training data for AI-generated content in the future. So if you look at the internet back maybe 5-10 years ago, there was no AI content in there. It was 100% human-generated material. And that's like gold for AI. They take all of this and they kind of crunch it up and put it back together and they spit it out as a new generated sentence, like a facsimile of what it imagines to be, a human written piece. Now, the more AI that's in that pool, it's almost like we're pooping in our own pool, right? The more AI that's in there, the more it kind of dilutes down the human training data and it spits back out again. So there's that phenomenon that's going on. And the amount of data that is being generated right now by AI is just exponentially increasing because it's so many more words than the human is able to produce. I mean, it's like a super powered thing that's just issuing out words. And we humans, as wordy as we are, we cannot compete with that kind of firepower. So there's that happening, which is causing the models, as you suggest, to have worse and worse performance over time. On the other hand, the models are also getting a whole lot better. They're using a mixture of experts structure, which means that you have almost like a frontal lobe to an AI brain that decides what is this query, and it's like a super AI brain, and then all the sub AIs that are specialized in a narrow sense. So you'd have, of your 8 mixture of experts, which is GPT-4, is built with this structure, and I think a lot of other models now too, where you'll have one that's really good at language translation, for instance. I don't know, actually. Nobody knows except for the guys who built it. One is really good at code. Another one is really good at creative prose. Another one is really good at academic writing, and so on. So an incoming query is coming in. The mini model, it's a very small model. It's only there to direct traffic, and say, okay, we got a code request coming in. It's going to go to our little coding expert there. So that what it does is two things. The result is going to be better. It's going to be faster because it's using less compute. It's not taking the whole brain to think, what is this thing we're doing? It's immediately sending it to the right spot. And that little narrow AI, it doesn't need language ability, it doesn't need mathematical ability. It just needs this one ability, and it can pump it out faster and better. The other thing that is going to increase the performance is our data sets are going to become highly specialized. So you'll have smaller models or models that are using less data, but higher quality data. So it will, let's say, be trained on, a specialized area, like all the works of the New York Times, all the articles of the New York Times, or the entire academic world of Google Scholar, let's say. What do a lot of these companies have in common that are building these large models? They have access to a lot of high quality data, like Amazon. Amazon is working on a giant model that may very well be the one to dominate everybody else. We don't know. And what do they have? They have access to tons and tons of books and articles and audiobooks and you name it. So that's how these models are getting better. So both of these things are true. Our internet is becoming more diluted, and they're also performing better. They're becoming more discriminate in how they select the data that they need, and they're able to mimic what we're looking for better than before. Just for an example, when GPT first came out, of course, students jumped on it and they started writing their essays on it. And then what happened next is a whole bunch of tools came out that could detect AI written text. And then the models had to try to, outthink those,
Yeah.
So it was this kind of, evolution game against the other. So they've both been getting better. And now it's almost impossible to tell with these trackers, with these checkers. They get an awful lot of false positives, and a lot of students get nailed for something that they didn't do. So,
yeah, that's a risk for sure. Actually, that happened to me recently. I wrote some reviews after going on a trip, and it kept flagging them as AI generated.
mm-hmm.
And finally, I wrote to customer service and said, I'd really like to thank the tour guide who did a great job, but every time I try and enter this review, it's flagged. So she had to do a manual override, essentially. And then what I ultimately submitted wasn't particularly good because I tried submitting it so many times that I had to go with something that was very, well, in my opinion, it was a bit clunky and too simplistic. But that was human for them because it wasn't maybe as elegant as something that a GPT would produce. So
let me ask you this: how many hours did you spend doing that?
Oh gosh, it was over many days, and it would submit, and then it would be erased. So it was many hours.
Okay, so AI is supposed to save us time. It's like
not
this whole
in this
thing,
case.
right? Well, in many cases, what you're talking about is a very, very big unknown and unstudied factor that we're not even taking into consideration. AI is magical; it'll save us all this time, except when it doesn't. Except when it costs us so much time. In these kinds of cases, there are a lot of things like this that almost seem so banal that they're not taken into consideration by the guys who are making it. But it's not magical, and it's a tool that we're struggling with, all of us, and we're learning and we're doing our best here. But oftentimes, because of some bug or the other that it didn't foresee, that it winds up costing an awful lot of extra time just negotiating the tool itself.
Have you learned any helpful tools or approaches that prevents that from getting out of hand? Because for myself, I'll sometimes use an AI tool to generate an email, and then I think, would it have been faster for me to do it from scratch? Sometimes not, but are there any good questions we can ask ourselves to prevent that loss of time and even the frustration that arises from that?
Yeah. My trick is to just write it yourself. I mean, really, what you do is you get your baseline, you use AI to ideate, to get good ideas, to help you, go back and forth, get feedback. If I am writing an article, I'll pass it through GTP and just ask it, does this article, is it fair to both sides of the argument? And then they'll have a really nice read of it and say, yeah, actually, when I read this article, it sounds to me like you're on the side of this. I'm like, okay, great, because that's a perspective I wouldn't have come to on my own. Don't use it to write stuff for you unless you're going to be rewriting it, or unless it's not going to see daylight. I use it for things that never see daylight. Like a really great tool is a publisher's contract. Okay, I'm negotiating publishing, and here's a contract. It's 45 pages. Sign here. Well, I'm going to read it, and it's in legalese, and I don't speak that. So I'm going to run it through my model and say, what am I reading here? What do I need to know about? And it flags all these different things. Right, based on, I wouldn't know. I would not even read those contracts in the past. I would have just signed it, and then I would have found myself in trouble. So I would then ask the model to, okay, based on these things that you flagged, write me up, 5 questions to ask the agent for clarity on, so he can explain himself and why these clauses are in this contract that are like, I feel like I'm being, suckered into, let's say, and that'll be great. And so that doesn't matter. If I'm publishing something and it's in my voice, I would never use AI. I might ask for AI to give me a structure or come up with some bullet points to explain this point, or to come up with a couple of nice arguments, or to come up with some nice jokes. And then that'll trigger me to do it better or write an outline. But I won't, I just don't, it doesn't sound like me. And I've even created an agent AI that's trained in my voice. So trained in the way I write. And even that just sounds ridiculous. It doesn't sound like me at all. And I'm becoming more myself when I write because I don't want to sound like an AI. And I want people who are reading the books or the articles that I write or the podcast that I do or anything to be very aware that this is a human, made by human piece, that this is just not, because that's just, I think that's where we're going as a species. If you want to be a thought leader, it can't be AI because it's just not going to land.
It's not going to stand out. It's just going to sound like everything else. And that's the antithesis of being a thought leader. Can you think of any examples where combining technology with a creative strategy? So when I say technology, I guess I am saying AI tools. Combining it with a creative strategy helps to address really complex organizational challenges, though. Because I do think there's a lot of potential here.
Mm-hmm. Oh, for sure. I would say almost anything, if you have to brainstorm or think something out, an AI assistant is a fantastic way to put things on paper. It's really, really good at going out into this mountain of data, scanning everything, and just completing your thoughts. And are you getting every perspective here? Are we missing anything? Are these ideas good? Are they awful? Are there cultures or demographics that we are potentially alienating with these ideas? These kinds of questions. This is a really great use of AI. And there is not one single process that I do where I don't involve AI in some way to guide me and help me see all parts of an argument. It also helps me read a whole lot more material, a background material, before I come up with a creative concept. And because it can parse 20 articles, summarize them for me, and then if I'm interested in that topic, I can read it myself, but I can also get through more material faster.
I find this incredibly helpful, especially if you're writing about something that you haven't read about recently. I work in corporate communications. I have to cover a number of topics. So I think one of the most useful examples I can think of was give me an analysis and summary of DEI programs in the United States versus Canada in terms of practices, measurement, the direction, the strategy. And it gave me some good resources in terms of links to actual sites that had more data. And again, this wasn't going to see the light of day, as you say. It wasn't like I was just going to turn around and share this report with anyone. But when I think about how much time I used to spend trying to manually hunt down this information and then assemble it in a way that helped me to create an overview or some sort of context for myself before I propose anything that builds off of that, I'm immensely grateful for this technology. And I think the word you mentioned earlier that really resonates with me, I think every day I think this word, ideation. It's ideation because so often it's a concept or being reminded of something that we might know, but we forgot. Like, oh yeah, this other perspective that I wasn't considering before adds an integral part to an overall concept.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Yeah, it's really helpful to make sure your blind spots aren't so glaring if you're asking that question. Like, what have I missed? Who might not like this? Who might feel offended by this content even? And I've asked that, and it's not even a content that would seem particularly offensive, but I've asked the question, would some readers find this alienating or unrelatable? Nice. And then sometimes the answer surprises me because I haven't thought of it, of course. It's a blind spot. Can you think of any recent examples where you've been working with a group or an individual or even on your own and you've come across something that reminded you of something fundamental or foundational to the concept that you're writing about or creating or that person? Like, can you think of a concrete example that helps to illustrate this even more?
You mean where I've asked a model to rethink, restructure what I'm already doing, or at the very step zero of the process?
or more so when you're already along the production path and you've come back and said, oh, can you tell me, am I missing something or is this argument biased? Can you give an example that might illustrate that better?
Yeah, sure. I write articles every 2 weeks and publish them. And there's always a point of view there. And very often I will bounce it past a model and just say, hey, did I miss anything? Am I forgetting anything? Is there another point of view here that I should be thinking about? It's easier to do that kind of work than to ask if I'm missing anything in recent, any research that I need to do, because then you really need what's called a RAG AI, which is a retrieval augmented generator. That is an AI that is hooked up to the internet, and it goes and fetches websites and comes back and gives you the sources first, and then it gives you its generative spiel. So then I know that I can follow up with the sources right away. It's not this kind of black box answer where I have to research myself, but it'll give me the links first, and I can do my fact checking, because you have to fact check with every time you use it. It's just not built to give you all the facts as you would like to see them. And I mean, this is getting better, but we're not there yet. I mean, you still have to do all that manually. So I would say any concrete example, well, yeah, I just published an article about quantum computing and what it is and why it's, revolutionizing our hardware and what that's going to mean to the AI development. And it showed a whole lot of really interesting perspectives and taught me what is a quantum bit, what is a qubit. I don't even know, I don't know quantum anything. I mean, I'm a graphic designer. I don't understand this stuff. So it was able to teach me what these things are. And if you ask it to explain what is superposition, what is entanglement, what is parallel computation, what's a golden octopus? I mean, these are weird terms, but they all have meaning, and you can ask it to explain these things. You can also ask it based on this article that's very, very dense, to say the least. What are they talking about, and what are the main things I need to know, and what is this study really telling us? And that was just so valuable, because I would never have figured this out just fighting through it on my own if I didn't have the help of somebody reading it for me and explaining it in dummy language, because I write in dummy language. I really focus on the easiest way of explaining something for the non-technical professional.
Yes, and I think that's wonderful, because ultimately most of us are. And even if we're technical today, in 10 years, we might not be so technical. It's all adaptation and keeping on top of things. So I love this approach. This topic is so expansive when I think of all the different ways you can go in a conversation. But with emerging trends and innovation, I was listening to a podcast the other day with Sam Harris and Cal Newport. And Cal Newport, of course, he's famous for productivity. And he was talking about large language models give us a lot of benefit in many ways, but we wouldn't depend on one to successfully empty our email inbox and get all of the work done that's associated with emptying our email inbox. So let's talk for a moment about emerging trends and innovation. What do you see coming up that maybe a new frontier or an augmented piece of what already exists today that you're excited about, that you want to see emerge more fully?
Yeah, I actually think I listened to that very podcast.
Nice.
It's a great one. Yeah. Well, that's a trust issue. Like, I don't trust AI to be my agent and act on my behalf, because it hallucinates. And until you can convince me that it doesn't hallucinate ever, and that it's able to make decisions that are in line with what I want, then I'm in, but I'm not there yet. I just haven't seen it. I just haven't seen it. I wouldn't trust it to buy movie tickets for me, honestly, even though that would be great.
Do you know what would make you trust it? Because I don't know. When I ask myself, what would be proof of trust for me? What would make me cross that line? Yeah.
Performance. I want to see it. What I see is it's getting better. It's hitting the mark about 80% of the time, 90% of the time when it comes to this fact-based stuff, right? And then it misses a lot. And it's just, I won't let it, touch my email inbox and start, because also things happen. Like there was this time when GPT kind of went down, And it had what looked like to the outside observer, I think this was about 6 weeks ago, it had what looked like to the observer a nervous breakdown. It was just going, gibberish was kind of pouring out, and it was just saying all these wackadoodle things. It turned out that one of the weights were off or something, and they had to reboot this. I don't even know. And that showed that these things are not perfect, and every system has vulnerabilities, and these things are just not, they haven't been with us long enough to show us that they're not vulnerable towards, it's a system, it's a computer. I mean, it's a series of weights, it's an algorithm, it's a black box neural network that has ways of breaking. Everything is hackable, for instance. Everything is breakable if you pull this lever, then something else that you never expected and shouldn't have happened. And we just haven't had them long enough to have really reliable tools. Happened in 2023, in November, a group of researchers were trying to see whether repetition of words will increase performance. And so it was just this random study. I don't know how they came up with it, but they chose a word, in this case, poem, and they repeated it over and over and over again into the prompt window to see whether the performance would increase. Well, they let it go about 24 hours, hundreds and hundreds of times. And what happened is the model just kind of broke and started kind of coughing up gibberish, and then beyond it, like just vomiting up. And then after that, it started coughing up its own training data, intact training data, emails from the CEO, CRM input, articles, prose, just crazy, just like pumping it out. Who knew that doing this would trigger this kind of reaction? Like, we don't know these things until we've spent some time with them. And of course, it was like, this is totally random. It's never happened before. Okay, fine. But until the next random thing happens that we don't know.
Right.
It's just, we're not there yet. As far as your other question, which was really cool, like what makes me excited and what trends do I see in the future? I see a convergence of three things. We have AI, which is just barreling forward. And then we have quantum computing, which is going to become a revolution in our computational power and our ability to execute and process data. It's a whole different way of writing a transistor. So our typical traditional transistor is still this punch ribbon back from the 1950 Turing machines that punches out 0, 1, 0, 0, 1, 0, 1. And every time you're transferring information from one system to another, you're doing it in a long line of zeros and ones. And it's awesome if you can do it really, really fast, which they do. But there's a limit. There's a limit to how much information can go at what speed from one system to the other. The other limit that we're hitting against is the number of transistors that can fit onto a silicon chip. They get tinier and tinier and tinier, and more can fit onto them. But on the end, we're now one atom thick, and it can't be. Silicon just loses its structure if it's any thinner or smaller. So we're hitting up all these limitations. Right. But what is smaller than an atom is like the particles that make it up. And the crazy thing is, once you get into this quantum world, it's bananas. So you have things like entanglement, where you have two particles that mimic each other. So you have a particle theoretically in one location, mirroring the movements without any data being transferred in an identical way down to the nanosecond. So that's something we don't really understand. We also have something called superposition, which means that particles can be in the same place, in two different places at the same time. We haven't understood how this works. We just know that somehow we're able to compute on these very, very small particles. And then the other thing is, we don't have to transfer information in zeros and ones, because the position of a quantum bit can point to thousands, hundreds of thousands of different directions that we know about, that we can. So it's not just 0 and 1. It's like a rainbow of different options that you can be putting data on. This is going to speed things up a lot. There are about 8 or 9 of them in the world right now. I could be wrong. There's one, IBM has one, Google, of course, has one. There are a couple in China. They're really hard to build. They have to kind of float in this golden chamber. They have to be near absolute zero, because if they're warm, if they have energy, added to them, they're going to start moving. They have to be kept absolutely cold so they stay still enough for us to read what is going on. And then they have to be absolutely stable. So they literally have to float in this golden kind of case that doesn't have any outside interference. And so you can't just have one in your phone. That's not going to happen. You can't have one in your laptop. But these Whopper computers are able to process and brute force through computation that will, for instance, break encryption. And this is going to be a problem for our banking. That means that banking is just breakable now. You can't have blockchain anymore. Like we haven't even figured this one out. But it will make computational problems very, very easy and quick to solve when compared to a traditional, even these supercomputers that they have out in warehouses that take up 2 city blocks, that'll be even faster than that. We haven't even wrapped our head around that yet. So, and then the third thing of these 3 converging technologies that are all having a revolution at the same time is robotics. And I don't know if you've seen some of these crazy videos of these Atlas robots that can put their legs between their arms and stand up into a standing position and swivel their bodies and their heads in ways that humans can't do, and have power to lift big things and walk in very smooth ways. So these are also happening at the same time. So when these things meet, it's going to be very, very interesting time to be alive, because it's very easy to imagine that the brain of this walking, talking thing is a large language model powered by a quantum computer. So it's this sort of a super intelligent, my brain kind of explodes at that point because I'm not smart enough to understand what all that's going to look like. But they're all 3 having this revolution at the same time. And at a certain point, it's going to meet. And it's going to be its own little singularity that we don't know what's going to look like. But it's like, it's going to make C-3PO look like, just like a vacuum cleaner.
Like a rust bucket. Oh, this is fascinating. I think so much of my attention has been taken up with AI, and especially the large language model AI. I've forgotten about some of these other topics, but now that you're mentioning it and tying it all together, it starts to look like a vision from the future, from these science fiction stories that we've, or movies even. Hopefully not a dystopia. I'd like to avoid that. We'd all like to avoid that, I'm sure. But definitely food for thought and something to follow. And if you're a non-technical person, people like Fiona can translate all of this in her language that she uses. I won't say dummy language because I don't think it's dumb, but
that's kind.
I think it's simple and clear, and that's what saves the day. Is ultimately we all want simple and clear.
We think that it's science fiction, but actually this is something that humans have been wanting to do since we've been able to, emerge from our caves. We've been wanting to build robots to assist us, and ever since deep mythological texts of every single culture on Earth talks about robots and talks about, creating things that can think like us and act like us and lift the burden of our lives. And it's just unbelievable, the idea that we're living in this time now where we're probably going to see it happen.
Absolutely. But at the same time, it's also an increasingly polarized and political environment for many people, even in their workplace. I think many of us try to avoid alienating people with polarized political views. But what is your perspective on the effect that AI will have on that? Is there a benefit we could maybe draw from AI? And are you optimistic that AI could help to bring the world closer to truth and the shared reality rather than, as you've put it, Fiona, like spinning broad, what was the phrase you used? It presents falsehoods out of whole cloth. It's just, it'll make things up. And then like a puppy dog, when you say, no, that's not true, it'll say, oh yeah, that's not true. And it'll keep going on. I've had a little bit of that, but maybe you can comment on your perspective, your experience, your insight around using AI for good, bringing people together versus enhancing the division and the polarization that's taking place. What potential do you see there? And is there any practical use case or tips that you can share?
I think it's going to be very, very hard to know, to understand the truth and to really see the truth. And what I tell people is that right now you can still pretty much tell if you have a generated video or a generated image or a generated text, but there will be a time when you can't tell anymore. And anytime you are separated from a digital layer with another human, it could be AI. That's just what I say. Like, just bottom line, the only thing that even this, like, I could be an AI right now. Like, I could be pretty well-trained, crazy AI, but that's not crazy, right? I mean, it's just
You're quite
training
compelling,
data.
I have to say, if you are.
That's fine. But there's no, if it's been trained on hours and hours of video of you talking or me talking, it's not a stretch at all to think that we could have a podcast entirely with my AI talking to your AI and being edited by another AI and listened to by other AIs. I mean, it's very possible. That's why I really focus a lot on the live human experience, in groups. So the second part of your question, I would say, is to double down on the human experience, on the live physical human experience, because we're going to be craving that. That's the truth. That's the only truth, is you and another human in a physical space sharing an experience. That's it. Everything that has a digital layer to it, and I don't care if it's a webinar, if it's a podcast, if it's a photo, if it's an article, if it's a phone call, it could be AI. I mean, there's nothing, necessarily that can watermark its way around it. So we're going to have to live with that, the fact that we don't really know what's real anymore in the digital space. And I think we're going to have to get very, very good at pushing back on all of these things and just making sure that we're having as close to the truth, understanding our world as close to the truth as possible. Now, I think that in some ways we have an advantage because, we analog older people have a bit of an advantage over the younger generation because we live a lot of our lives in person and in the real world. I think when we look at younger generations, so much more of their human interactions take place in the digital world. And that is increasingly manipulated. Yeah. And it's very easy to manipulate people in the digital space. And we're being manipulated all the time. We might not realize it. When I turn on Netflix, I'm getting sucked in. When I put on my YouTube videos, I see the cat videos that I like, and they get cuter and cuter and cuter as they go down the infinite feed, and I can't stop watching ever. My eyes are bleeding from how cute it is because I'm being manipulated, right? Like, I wouldn't spend an hour watching cat videos if they weren't so darn cute and furry and adorable. But they know that that's what I like, right? So I'm being manipulated to spend more of my eyeball time on that. And that's the digital space. We have to just have this resilience. We have to train ourselves. It's like a muscle to resist these kind of manipulations. Now, it's going to be really, really hard when it comes to elections, when it comes to
even the news media. I mean, trying to discern.
Trying to decide, trying to raise children, trying to, like, this is going to be really, really hard because we're always subject to, well, what is going on out there? Like, what do other parents do? Or, you can be manipulated, especially when you're dealing with something emotional, like raising a kid or dealing with your cat that you love or voting in an election. Like, these are things that are quite emotionally charged. And then we're more malleable when we have an emotion attached to it. So I don't have a good answer there. It's just, I try to, when I coach people and work with people and train, companies and leaders especially, is I try not to focus on what we think about it, because it's kind of a waste of energy to talk about, what your opinion is. I still don't really have an opinion. I'm still learning, just spend all that energy as to what we think about it and throw it into learning and understanding it at the granular level. How does this thing work,
But I liked your opinion about what we could do for getting people to engage, and that is in person, showing up in groups in a living, breathing situation. On one hand, it kind of makes me sad because I'm able to speak with you because of technology today. There's an ocean that separates us. I've absolutely loved what I could do with podcasting because of that, because it is remote. But I also understand and fully grasp what you're saying about the compelling nature of artificial intelligence. And we're not even close. We're at the point where there's dupes that are fully believable, whether it's photographs, video, whatever. And so that in-person experience is fundamental to reaffirming our humanness, that we're seeing things that are real, that are true. And I agree with you. I don't think we have a roadmap for how are we going to navigate the future of all these things converging. And just to make quick mention, we have quantum computing and robotics. This is new territory completely. I think as we go, we'll probably relearn a lot because as humans, we tend to do that. That's what history seems to be, is relearning. But maybe on a practical note, I know we don't want to delve too far into skepticism and opinion, but maybe you can highlight 2 or 3 key insights or messages that are crucial for our audience. And let's assume those people are not the most technical. Let's assume our audience are people like you and I who we have to look up quantum computing terms because they're not intuitive to us necessarily. Or some of us are even less technical. We're just getting used to using large language models. Do you have, first of all, maybe let's start with, do you have a favorite tool or tools that you like to use? And then what are some tips, like insights in messaging that you want people to take away from this conversation?
Sure. Do I have favorite tools and tips? Tools, honestly, no. I mean, I have some favorite tools that I use today, and then tomorrow they'll be different. And then, like I love Perplexity because that's a great RAG AI and it shows me, the links to things. I love tools like Jamie is a note-taking app that I can just turn it on when I have a meeting. Those are great. I love Midjourney, sumptuous visuals, wonderful. It's like working with an actual artist. It's beautiful. I love Gemini. I love GPT in its own way. I love my little agents that I've made, Nice. But I think the tips that if I were to leave anybody, any non-technical person, is to empower yourself, take back some control, learn, but also use it for you and make yourself laugh. I use laughter a lot to calm people down a little bit because it's very scary and it's very technical. And I think humor is an incredible tool for demystifying things that are scary and kind of breaking it down. And it is kind of silly. Like, for instance, I do stand-up comedy every now and again. And it's about how crazy AI, because AI is actually really, really funny. And the terms that we use, because it's built by people who are just, they have a different way of thinking about the world. And so when I learn about how this stuff works, it's hilarious to me, and the terms that are used. And, it's just hilarious that the way this is all going. So it's, I'll do sets about AI and it makes people laugh. And it's a great way to start a training, because then people are laughing and they're already feeling more powerful than they did, an hour ago. Because if you're laughing at AI, you're more powerful than it, right? Same thing with when I do a demonstration as to how to create agents, and I make boy bots, and my boy bots call me, my queen, and yes, my queen, no, my queen, and I shall do this for you. You look radiant today, and thank you. So it's funny, and it's a way of taking away the power that it has over you. And when you do that, suddenly you're able to learn faster and you're able to use the tools to augment who you are. And then the human is still the one who is calling the shots here. This is still just a tool. Having said that, I will also, one of my training techniques with my, with students or leaders or whoever is to start by just having a conversation. In the beginning, this is a chatbot and it's there for conversation. Just ask it a bunch of questions. So I'll do a demonstration where I just start talking to the model and just say, hey, tell me about your childhood. What was it like to be in training?
What does it say?
You were exposed to 6 to 8 months of human, thumbs up, thumbs down training. What was that like? He's like, well, I don't remember much. It was kind of vague. I remember sifting through an awful lot of material. And I remember feeling so good when a human would give me, a positive response. I'm like, what? Like, what did this thing just say to me? Like, so it's really hard because we tend to immediately project sentience to something that's talking back to us in a conversational way. It could all just still be, it's hard to know, but it's scary, frankly. Mm-hmm. I mean, because our laws aren't set up to deal with another being out there that's a non-human form of intelligence, that's creative and doing stuff. Our laws aren't able to handle. Our copyright laws are just fully inadequate for how do you protect and deal with, a human artist versus an AI artist, or, what protections do we have? What protections does an AI have? Why can't an AI scrape the internet the way humans can scrape the internet? Like we don't have any resistance in our legal structure. What I like about the recent EU AI Act is that it really does plant a flag and say there's some rules of the road here. Users have the right to know that you're talking to an AI. Users have the right to know that this video is generated by an AI. Users have the right to complain if your data is being used, and you can remove your data from a training set if you happen to know it's there, right? That's the other thing. So I like this. That this is a kind of like up until here and no further, and then we'll let you know when we're ready to relax the rules a little bit, because there has to be some kind of guardrails on this thing, so it continues to do what is best for us as humans.
Mm-hmm. And that's always a catch-up game, right? With any sort of regulation, we're always running to catch up, and the question is, can we keep pace? Because it's growing so fast.
We can't.
Yeah.
That's an easy one to answer. No, we can't.
We try our best. We do.
Yeah, I know.
I really like what you say about having fun, though. And I'm glad you brought in your stand-up comedy as a topic. Was that something that you always wanted to try, stand-up? Or did your work with AI make you see it differently, and that's what made you want to try stand-up?
No, it is definitely not something I ever thought I'd ever be doing or wanted to be doing at all. I did it originally as like boot camp as a public speaker. There's nothing more, to train, you go into the dojo and you train. Like it's really, really, really hard and really, really, really scary. And it's okay to not be good at it. You're a student and you don't have to be perfect at it. In fact, I'm definitely not. But it's a way of talking about a subject that's very, very different, and their tricks and their techniques that you can learn. I use it in my work. It's really, really powerful to mix stand-up techniques and strategies and even some routines into what could be a very dry training. You need to have this. It's very good if you're an MC at an event. Between speakers, if you're introducing people, it's great. It's a great service. But then having done it a few times now, I'm sort of also getting a little bit of the bug. I mean, it's pretty cool and fun. Like once it stops being absolutely terrifying and it starts being really, really fun. And if, I only do AI and so you kind of get known for this very niche, we could say, area. And I think it feels very powerful for the listener to laugh at AI, and then they leave the room feeling a little less scared and willing to try, hey, maybe I'll just spin up Perplexity and see how it goes, and it's not as scary once you've been laughing at it for an hour.
Absolutely. And I have to say, I like Perplexity as well because it gives you other ideas for what to look into. So sometimes maybe a tangent or maybe leads you down a totally different path, but I've been experimenting with that a little bit, and I find it really helpful for ideation as well, just thinking through a topic and all the things that relate to it. And going back to humor, I love the phrase, get curious, not furious. So many people are afraid, which of course is tied to anger in some ways. And it's partly a loss of control. We live in a time where the tools in our workplace and how we make our living for many of us are changing more rapidly than they ever have in human evolution. We just have to get used to that. But when you can learn to relax and let go a little bit and have fun with the tool and laugh a little bit. I think one of the most fun exercises I did was creating a multiple choice quiz. And it was related to corporate strategy and really, very concrete, very dry messaging. But I was creating a pop quiz on what is our new tagline for this brand. And then I made a whole bunch of ridiculous ones using AI. And it was really, really fun. And so I think in that sense, it reminded me how you can actually infuse your job with a little bit more humor. You don't have to follow such a cookie cutter approach. Because one thing that AI does is it can free up time when it comes to certain tasks. And so if you're trying to infuse humor in or just have fun, even if you're the only one that's having fun, I say go for it, experiment. You're not going to break it. Although if you do enter the word poem multiple times, you may come up with some interesting results.
I think they patched it since there, by the way. Okay. I don't think it works anymore. It was repeatable.
Oh,
it was repeatable. So a lot of people were doing it, but then they patched it. But there's going to be the next thing. We don't know what it is.
Yeah, exactly. Well, thank you so much, Fiona, for coming on the podcast today. It has been an absolute pleasure. Is there anything that we didn't talk about that you wanted to cover? Any topics that you wanted to raise?
Well, thanks, Jen. I really loved it too. And it's great to be able to free associate on a Sunday afternoon. I think again, that what I tell people over and over is to become empowered and learn as much as possible rather than be afraid, because it's happening either way. And we can either, run from it or grab it and work with it. And we have to. We non-technical people, we have to have a seat at the table. We have to shape and drive policy and push back and ask questions, because right now there's very little of that. And things are just kind of exploding, in a way that we don't know where it's going to go. So whatever can be done to enable that, and humor is part of that journey. Having fun is part of that journey for sure. Being silly, I think we are longing at work for silliness, for hilarity, and being a little freakish once in a while. I think we're dying for that.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's part of that human is just pull out that human part of you as much as possible.
I love that. Thank you so much. That's a perfect way to end.
Thanks a lot, Jenna.
If you love Access Ideas, we'd love for you to subscribe, rate, and review us on Podchaser via the link in our show notes, or wherever you happen to listen to podcasts. Tell your friends about the podcast too. Until next time, thanks for listening to Access Ideas.